A bank that needs cash overnight can borrow it against the securities it already owns. It hands over the bonds, takes the money, and agrees to buy the same bonds back in a few days. The trade is called a repurchase agreement, a repo. Banks do it constantly, and there is nothing wrong with it. Because the bonds are coming back, the bank still owns them. The cash is a loan, and the loan sits on the balance sheet as debt. But if the bank has genuinely given the bonds up and cannot get them back, then it is not a loan at all. It is a sale. So the whole question is whether the bank still controls what it handed over, and the accounting rule answered that question with a number. If the bank posted collateral worth between 98 and 102% of the cash, it kept control, and the trade stayed a loan. Post more than that, and the rule said control was gone. The trade became a sale, and the debt left the page entirely. Lehman Brothers posted 105. The control that decided all of it was 3 percentage points wide. Lehman was an investment bank in Midtown Manhattan, 7th Avenue, a tower with a screen wrapped around its base. Its financial year ended on the 30th of November, and like every listed company, it published what it owed. The number investors watched most closely was leverage, how much the bank had borrowed against what it actually held. In 2007, that number was getting harder to explain, because the assets underneath it were getting harder to sell. Lehman had a way of making the number smaller for a few days at a time. The bank called it Repo 105. It was written up in the firm's own accounting policy manual. The manual explained where the trades had to be done, and it explained exactly why they had to be done there. No American law firm would give the opinion that the accounting treatment required, so the treatment was not available in New York. An English one would, correctly, because English law is different. So the trades were done in London. Lehman's European arm sat at 25 Bank Street, and securities were moved from New York so that they could be sold there. Nothing about that is unlawful. An opinion on English law that is right about English law is simply right. But it tells you something that the firm had to leave the country to find someone who would say yeah. And Lehman wrote that reason down in its own manual in February 2008, 7 months before the firm ceased to exist. The manual was not a secret document. It was firm policy, written down, circulated, and followed. Here is what those trades actually did to the page that investors were reading each quarter. In the last days of a quarter, Lehman moved tens of billions of dollars of securities out of the firm and took cash for them. It used that cash to pay down debt, so the balance sheet on the reporting date looked smaller. Then, a few days into the new quarter, it bought the securities back and the debt returned. The examiner who later reconstructed all of this found the securities were usually gone for 7 to 10 days. At the end of November 2007, the value of securities treated this way was about $39 billion. At the end of February 2008, it was about $49 billion. At the end of May, about $50 billion. Reported leverage across those 3 quarters was 16.1, then 15.4, then 12.1. Without the trades, those same 3 quarters would have read 17.8, 17.3, and 13.9, between 1.5 and 2 turns of leverage, appearing and disappearing on a schedule. Lehman's own internal rules said the trades should be used steadily through the quarter, not banked up at the end. The firm did not follow its own rules, and nobody inside it made the firm follow them. In May 2008, a senior vice president wrote to management raising concerns about the firm's accounting. He was one of several people who raised something. The examiner later said the first lesson of the whole affair was not to marginalize them. Lehman's auditors were told about the letter. The firm's outside accountants were Ernst and Young. When the examiner asked whether the volumes at quarter end were material, the auditors would not say. In 2009, a court appointed an examiner to find out what had happened to Lehman Brothers. He and his team read millions of documents and interviewed hundreds of people. His report ran to 9 volumes and was published in March 2010, 18 months after the firm had gone. On the trades, his finding was about disclosure rather than about the accounting. He deliberately did not decide whether the treatment complied with the rule because it did not matter to the question he was asked. What mattered was that investors were never told the practice existed at all. The examiner's point to the Senate was that technical compliance was never supposed to be enough. The accounts have to be fair and accurate taken as a whole. That was already the rule. And 3 years before any of it, the regulator's own staff had written down exactly how a rule like this gets used. They said rules with a hard edge become a map for getting around them. That was published in June 2005. Nobody had to wait for a bankruptcy to know how it would be used. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy on the 15th of September 2008 in New York. It was the largest corporate bankruptcy in the history of the United States, and it is still the largest today. It did not fail because of these trades. It failed because it could not sell what it owned and could not borrow against it either. No executive of Lehman Brothers was ever charged over the accounting, and none was ever convicted of anything to do with it. In April 2011, the Accounting Standards Board deleted the rule that had turned on the number. It said the test should not depend on an exchange of collateral at all. The board never mentioned Lehman Brothers anywhere in the document. It did not have to. The other half of the repair was a disclosure rule. Firms would have had to publish what they borrowed across the whole quarter, not just on the last day. The regulator proposed that rule in September 2010 and then opened it for comment. Comments came in through the winter. Most of them came from banks and from the organizations that represent them. It was never adopted. The regulator has since said so plainly in its own review of its own disclosure rules. So half the control was rebuilt and half of it was argued away. That is what a material weakness is, not the trade. The 3 points of daylight nobody closed.